For nearly 200 years, the vast and diverse land of India was under the control of the British Empire. This period, known as the British Raj, began in the mid-18th century. The British East India Company, a trading organization, slowly gained power across the subcontinent. They took control of local kingdoms, collected taxes, and made new laws. The British built railways, telegraph lines, and large government buildings. These projects changed the face of India, connecting distant regions like never before. However, this rule was not for the benefit of the Indian people. It was designed to enrich Britain, and the wealth of India was systematically drained away to support the empire far across the sea. The Indian economy was reshaped to serve British interests, which often harmed local industries and farmers. Life under British rule was complex and often difficult for ordinary Indians. The British established a system of government where they held all the top positions of power. Indians were largely excluded from making important decisions about their own country. A new education system was introduced, teaching English and Western ideas, which created a small, educated Indian class. While this group had new opportunities, it also created a cultural gap between them and the rest of the population. The British saw themselves as superior rulers, bringing civilization to a land they considered backward. This attitude created deep resentment and a growing sense of injustice among many Indians, who felt like second-class citizens in their own homeland. The British also had a policy of divide and rule. They often emphasized the differences between various Indian communities, particularly between Hindus and Muslims. They created separate electorates, where people could only vote for candidates of their own religion. This political strategy made religious identity more important than ever before. It sowed seeds of suspicion and competition between communities that had, for centuries, lived alongside each other in relative peace. By categorizing people based on their faith, the British administration made it harder for a single unified Indian identity to emerge. This created deep fractures in society that would later have devastating consequences for the entire subcontinent. Over time, the desire for freedom grew stronger. Indians from all walks of life began to question British authority. They were tired of foreign rule, economic exploitation, and the feeling of being powerless in their own land. The early sparks of resistance started small, with local protests and writings that criticized the government. But these small sparks slowly grew into a large fire. The experience of being ruled by a distant power united people in a shared dream, the dream of a free and independent India. This collective yearning for self-rule set the stage for one of the largest anti-colonial movements in world history, a struggle that would ultimately change the map of the world forever. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw the birth of organized movements for Indian independence. People were no longer content with quiet resentment. They began to form groups to demand their rights. The Indian National Congress was founded in 1885. Initially, it was a moderate group of educated Indians who simply wanted a greater say in the government. They wrote petitions and held meetings, hoping to persuade the British to grant more reforms. However, their polite requests were often ignored by the colonial rulers. This led to a gradual shift within the Congress, as younger and more radical members began to call for complete independence, or Swaraj, rather than just small changes. Another major political organization, the All India Muslim League, was formed in 1906. This group was created to protect the political rights and interests of Muslims in India. Its leaders were concerned that in a future independent India, where Hindus were the majority, the Muslim minority might be overlooked or treated unfairly. The Muslim League also started with moderate goals, seeking representation and safeguards within the British system. Like the Congress, it eventually evolved. As the independence movement gained momentum, the Muslim League's focus shifted towards ensuring that the Muslim community had a powerful and distinct voice in any future political arrangement for the country. This marked the beginning of two parallel political streams. The push for independence became a mass movement after World War I. India had contributed a huge number of soldiers and resources to the British war effort. Many Indians expected greater political freedom as a reward for their sacrifice. When these hopes were not met, disappointment turned into widespread anger. The British responded with harsh laws to suppress dissent, which only fueled the fire of resistance. It was during this period that Mahatma Gandhi emerged as a major leader. He introduced new methods of protest, such as non-violent civil disobedience. Millions of ordinary people, farmers, workers, students, and women joined the struggle, making it a powerful force that the British could no longer easily control. Across the country, the cry for freedom grew louder and more unified. People organized massive protests, boycotted British goods, and refused to cooperate with the colonial government. Acts of civil disobedience, like the famous Salt March in 1930, captured the world's attention. These movements showed the deep resolve of the Indian people to achieve self-rule. While the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League often had different ideas about the future, they were both part of this growing wave of anti-colonial feeling. The British Raj was facing an unprecedented challenge from a population that was now fully awakened and determined to chart its own destiny, free from foreign domination. The story of India's independence is also the story of its remarkable leaders. Among them, Mahatma Gandhi stood out as a figure of immense influence. He was not just a political leader but also a spiritual guide for millions. Gandhi's philosophy of satyagraha, or non-violent resistance, became the central pillar of the freedom struggle. He believed that Indians could win their freedom not through fighting with weapons, but through moral strength and peaceful protest. He led famous campaigns like the Non-Cooperation Movement and the Quit India movement. He lived a simple life and connected deeply with the poor and rural masses, inspiring them to join the cause and face British power with courage and discipline. Jawaharlal Nehru was another towering figure in the Indian National Congress and a close associate of Gandhi. He was an intellectual, a visionary, and a charismatic leader who became India's first Prime Minister. Nehru envisioned a modern, secular, and democratic India. He believed in scientific progress, industrial development, and social justice. While he deeply respected Gandhi, he sometimes had different ideas about the economy and the structure of the state. Nehru played a crucial role in negotiating with the British and in shaping the policies of the future independent nation. His powerful speeches and writings inspired a generation of Indians to dream of a forward-looking country free from poverty and old social divisions. Representing the All India Muslim League was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He was a brilliant lawyer and a sharp political strategist. In his early career, Jinnah was a member of the Indian National Congress and was known as an ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. However, over time, he became disillusioned. He grew convinced that the Congress did not adequately represent Muslim interests. He feared that in a united India dominated by the Hindu majority, Muslims would lose their cultural identity and political power. Jinnah became the most powerful advocate for a separate nation for Muslims, a country he would later call Pakistan. His determination and unwavering stance made him a formidable negotiator. These three leaders, Gandhi, Nehru, and Jinnah, were the main architects of the final years of the British Raj. Their personalities, beliefs, and decisions shaped the destiny of the subcontinent. Gandhi dreamed of a united and harmonious India where all communities lived together. Nehru worked for a modern socialist-inspired republic. Jinnah fought relentlessly for a separate homeland to protect the Muslim minority. Their interactions, agreements, and disagreements during the critical negotiations with the British would ultimately lead not only to freedom, but also to the painful division of the land they all called home. Their legacies continue to influence the politics and identity of India and Pakistan to this day. The demand for a separate Muslim state did not appear overnight. It grew slowly from a sense of political anxiety and cultural distinctiveness among a section of India's Muslim population. For many years, leaders in the All India Muslim League had tried to secure political safeguards for Muslims within a united India. They asked for things like guaranteed representation in government bodies and protection for their language and culture. However, they felt that the Indian National Congress, despite its claims of representing all Indians, was largely driven by Hindu perspectives and interests. This feeling of being politically marginalized became stronger over the years. The turning point came in the late 1930s and early 1940s. the Muslim League, under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, began to promote the two-nation theory. This idea argued that Hindus and Muslims were not just two different religious communities, but two distinct nations. It stated that their cultures, traditions, histories, and social customs were so different that they could not live together peacefully in a single country. This theory provided a powerful emotional and political argument for separation. It suggested that a united India would mean the rule of the Hindu majority over the Muslim minority, which was presented as an unacceptable future for Muslims. In 1940, the Muslim League passed the Lahore Resolution. This was a formal declaration that demanded the creation of independent states for Muslims in the eastern and northwestern regions of India, where they formed a majority. This resolution is now seen as the foundational moment in the demand for Pakistan. It transformed the political landscape completely. What was once a call for protective measures within India became an explicit demand for a separate country. Jinnah argued that this was the only way to ensure the political, economic, and religious freedom of India's Muslims. The idea of Pakistan began to capture the imagination of millions of Muslims who saw it as a promised land. The Indian National Congress, including leaders like Gandhi and Nehru, was strongly opposed to the idea of dividing the country. They believed in a united, secular India where people of all faiths could be equal citizens. They saw the demand for Pakistan as a British-encouraged strategy to weaken the independence movement. For them, the partition of India was like cutting a living body in two. They argued that Hindus and Muslims shared a common culture and history that spanned centuries. However, the political divide grew deeper, and trust between the two parties broke down. The dream of a single, free India was now challenged by an equally powerful dream of a separate homeland for Muslims. After World War II ended in 1945, the British Empire was, well, really weakened and could no longer afford to hold on to India. The new Labour government in Britain, led by Prime Minister Clement Attlee, was committed to granting India independence. Now the main question was no longer if India would be free, but what a free India would actually look like. A series of intense negotiations began between the British, the Indian National Congress, and the Muslim League. The British sent a high-level cabinet mission to India in 1946 to try and find a solution that would keep the country united. The mission proposed a pretty complex plan for a three-tiered federal structure with a weak central government. This cabinet mission plan was, you could say, a last-ditch effort to avoid partition. It suggested that provinces could form groups based on their religious majorities, giving Muslims significant autonomy in their regions, while still being part of a larger Indian Union. At first, both the Congress and the Muslim League accepted the plan, though of course, each had their own interpretations and reservations. However, trust between the two parties was at an all-time low. A controversial statement by Nehru suggesting that the Congress might modify the plan later really alarmed Jinnah and the Muslim League. They feared that the Congress would use its majority in the central government to dismantle the protections given to Muslims. Feeling that the negotiations had failed to secure Muslim interests, the Muslim League withdrew its acceptance of the cabinet mission plan. Jinnah and the League called for Direct Action Day on August 16, 1946, to peacefully demand the creation of Pakistan. However, the day turned horrifically violent in Calcutta, now Kolkata, leading to thousands of deaths in communal riots between Hindus and Muslims. This event, known as the Great Calcutta Killing, spread to other parts of India. The widespread violence convinced many, including the British, that a united India was no longer possible. The country seemed to be on the brink of a full-scale civil war. In early 1947, the British government made a final, dramatic announcement. Lord Louis Mountbatten was appointed as the last Viceroy of India, with a clear mandate to transfer power quickly. After assessing the situation and holding talks with all the leaders, Mountbatten concluded that partition was the only way to avoid further bloodshed. He announced that the British would leave India by August 1947, a much earlier date than anyone expected. Faced with the reality of escalating violence and a non-negotiable deadline, the Indian National Congress, led by Nehru and Sardar Patel, reluctantly agreed to the division of the country. The decision to partition India was now final. Once the decision to partition India was made, the enormous and complicated task of drawing the new borders began. The British government appointed a lawyer named Sir Cyril Radcliffe to lead 2 boundary commissions. He was given the responsibility of dividing the provinces of Punjab in the west and Bengal in the east. These provinces had mixed populations of Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs. Radcliffe had never been to India before and was given only 5 weeks to complete this monumental task. He had to draw a line on a map that would separate millions of people, cutting through villages, farms, and even houses. The process was rushed and done with little understanding of the local geography or culture. The final borders, known as the Radcliffe Line, were kept secret until 2 days after independence was declared on August 15, 1947. When the new map was revealed, it caused shock and chaos. Millions of people suddenly discovered that they were on the wrong side of the border. Hindus and Sikhs living in the newly created West and East Pakistan found themselves a minority in a Muslim nation. Similarly, Muslims in the new India became a minority in a Hindu-majority country. The line was drawn in a way that often ignored the reality on the ground, leaving sacred sites, communities, and economic systems divided. The announcement of the borders triggered one of the largest and most frantic migrations in human history. Fear and uncertainty gripped the population. People were terrified of living as a minority in a new country where they might face violence or discrimination. In a matter of weeks, an estimated 10 to 12 million people left their ancestral homes and traveled to the other side of the border. They moved by train, by bullock cart, and most often on foot. Families packed whatever they could carry and set off on long, dangerous journeys towards what they hoped would be a safe haven in their new country. The migration was chaotic and poorly managed. The newly formed governments of India and Pakistan were not prepared for the sheer scale of the displacement. Refugee camps were quickly overwhelmed, lacking adequate food, water, and sanitation. Trains carrying refugees, known as blood trains, were often attacked by armed mobs from the opposing community. People traveled in massive columns called kafilas, which stretched for miles, vulnerable to attacks, disease, and starvation. What was meant to be a political solution had turned into a humanitarian catastrophe, as millions were uprooted and forced to start new lives from scratch. The period of partition was marked by unimaginable violence and brutality. The political division of the land led to a social explosion of hatred and fear. As millions of people migrated across the newly drawn borders, communal tensions erupted into widespread massacres. In provinces like Punjab and Bengal, which were cut in half, the violence was most intense. Neighbors turned against neighbors. Mobs armed with swords, spears, and guns roamed the countryside and cities, attacking people from the other community. Entire villages were burned down, and countless innocent men, women, and children were killed in a frenzy of religious violence. Women bore the brunt of the horrific violence in deeply personal and tragic ways. They became targets, used by mobs to dishonor the opposing community. An estimated 75,000 to 100,000 women were abducted and subjected to terrible acts of violence. They were seen not as individuals, but as symbols of their community's honor. Many families, fearing this fate for their daughters and wives, made the devastating choice to kill their own female relatives to protect them from dishonor. The stories of suffering from this period are heartbreaking and reveal the complete breakdown of social order and human decency. The violence was not just random chaos, it was often organized. Local militias and extremist groups on both sides planned and carried out brutal attacks. They targeted refugee trains and convoys, leading to mass slaughter. The civil administration and police forces, which were in the process of being divided themselves, were often ineffective or even complicit in the violence. In many places, law and order completely collapsed, leaving ordinary people with no protection. The scale of the killing was immense, with estimates of the death toll ranging from a few 100,000 to as many as 2 million people. Beyond the immediate killings, the partition left deep and lasting scars on the minds of those who survived. It created a generation of people who had lost everything: their homes, their land, their families, and their sense of security. The memory of this trauma was passed down to future generations, shaping the relationship between India and Pakistan for decades to come. The suffering was not just physical, it was a profound psychological wound. The joy of independence was forever stained by the sorrow and bloodshed of the partition, a human cost that can never be fully measured or forgotten. On the stroke of midnight, as August 14th turned into August 15th, 1947, British rule over India officially came to an end. Two new, independent nations were born, India and Pakistan. In Delhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, gave his famous Tryst with Destiny speech. He spoke of a long-suppressed soul of a nation finding its voice. August 15th became India's Independence Day, a moment of immense pride and hope for millions. India set out on a path to become a secular democratic republic with a constitution that promised justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity to all its citizens, regardless of their religion or background. Pakistan celebrated its independence one day earlier, on August 14, 1947. It was created as a homeland for the Muslims of the subcontinent. Muhammad Ali Jinnah became its first Governor-General, and Liaquat Ali Khan became its first Prime Minister. Pakistan itself was geographically divided into two parts, West Pakistan and East Pakistan, which would later become Bangladesh in 1971, separated by over 1,000 miles of Indian territory. The creation of Pakistan was the fulfillment of a dream for many Muslims, who believed it would offer them a safe and secure future where they could live according to their own values and traditions. However, the birth of these two nations was overshadowed by the chaos of partition. Both India and Pakistan faced enormous challenges right from the start. They had to build new governments, create new institutions, and establish law and order. Their biggest immediate task was to manage the massive influx of refugees. Millions of displaced people needed food, shelter, and jobs. The economies of both countries were disrupted. The division of assets, from the army and civil services down to library books and office furniture, was a complex and often contentious process that created further bitterness between the two new states. Despite the joy of freedom, the early days of independence were a time of great struggle and uncertainty. Both India and Pakistan had to deal with the immediate aftermath of the violence and the long-term consequences of the division. The leaders of both nations had to work tirelessly to build their countries from the ground up, while navigating a deeply hostile relationship with each other. The birth of these two nations was a moment of dual emotions. The exhilaration of gaining independence from colonial rule was deeply intertwined with the profound pain and tragedy of the partition that accompanied it. The partition of 1947 was not just a single event in history. It cast a long and dark shadow over the future of South Asia. Its most immediate legacy was the creation of a deeply hostile relationship between India and Pakistan. The two countries have been rivals ever since, fighting several wars and engaging in a continuous state of military and political conflict. The dispute over the territory of Kashmir, a princely state that was also divided during partition, became the main point of contention and remains a dangerous flashpoint to this day. This enduring enmity has shaped the foreign policies, military spending, and national identities of both countries for over 75 years. The division also had a profound impact on the lives of millions of people and their descendants. Families were permanently separated by the new border. The shared culture, language, and history that had connected communities for centuries were fractured. The memory of the violence and displacement created a sense of bitterness and mistrust that was passed down through generations. For the millions of refugees who had to rebuild their lives from nothing, the trauma of partition remained a defining experience. The stories of loss and survival became a central part of the collective memory in both India and Pakistan, shaping literature, art, and personal histories. On a political level, partition solidified religious identity as a major factor in the politics of the subcontinent. Pakistan was founded as an Islamic republic, and its identity has been closely tied to religion. India chose to be a secular state, but it has constantly struggled with tensions between its Hindu majority and large Muslim minority. The legacy of partition has often been used by political groups in both countries to fuel religious nationalism and create divisions for political gain. This has made it difficult to heal the wounds of the past and move towards a more peaceful and cooperative future for the region. Today, nearly 8 decades after the event, the legacy of partition continues to be felt. While India and Pakistan have grown into large, complex and independent nations, they remain tied together by their shared painful history. The borders drawn in 1947 are still a source of conflict, and the human cost of that division is still remembered with sorrow. The untold story of partition is not just about the drawing of lines on a map. It is about the millions of individual stories of loss, survival, and the difficult search for new beginnings. It serves as a powerful and tragic reminder of the consequences of dividing people based on faith.